Let me start with something mildly uncomfortable. Most AWS architectures fail not because engineers ignore best practices, but because they follow them too closely. We've turned guidance into doctrine, patterns into religion, and somewhere along the way, architects stopped thinking and started assembling. If you've ever looked at an AWS diagram and thought, why does every system look the same? That's not an accident. That's dogma. And dogma does not scale. Cloud is consistent. Your feedback loops are expensive. Great architects design for how decisions age. Others compound entropy. Let's talk about microservices, because this one refuses to die. AWS encourages decoupling, independent deployability, and scaling. That makes sense. But microservices were designed to solve one very specific problem: organizational scaling. They exist because large teams cannot coordinate around a single deployment boundary. That's it. They were not designed to make small systems elegant. They were not designed to make debugging easier. They were not designed to impress your CTO. Microservices scale organizations. They do not scale systems. Yet I routinely see 6 developers maintaining 30 services. When I ask why, the answer is, well, that's modern architecture. No, that's feature shopping. If teams aren't blocked, if deployments aren't colliding, you are adding distribution cost without solving coordination friction. And distribution is not free. You pay for it in tracing, retries, eventual consistency, and human cognition. Most systems should begin life as modular monoliths. Separation inside, not fragmentation outside. Break it apart when pressure appears, not before. Because architecture is the management of delayed consequences. If you fragment early, you're just designing for a future you haven't earned yet. That's trajectory design, and it's usually the wrong one. Then there's the use as many managed services as possible mindset. Managed services are powerful, but here's what nobody says out loud. Every new AWS service you add introduces a new behavioral model. New IAM semantics, new retry semantics, new logging location, new billing dimension, new failure mode. Individually, each service is clean. Collectively, they form a distributed organism. You didn't remove complexity, you atomized it. I've seen pipelines that look like this: S3 to event bridge, to step functions, to Lambda, to glue, to a queue, to another Lambda, and finally a database. When it fails, nobody knows where to look first. Before you add another service, ask, is this removing operational burden? Or is it just redistributing architectural responsibility? Fewer services, clearer intent, more explicit control. That's architecture. Architecture follows incentives, and decisions accumulate whether you track them or not. Now let's address the assumption. Serverless is cheaper. It can be, but only under the right workload shape. Serverless pricing scales per event, per millisecond, per invocation, per retry. It scales linearly. That's beautiful for spiky traffic. It's brutal for sustained load. Containers scale by capacity, and capacity amortizes. If your system runs constantly, serverless can quietly become the most expensive decision in the room. If you don't model workload shape, you're not architecting, you're guessing. Engineering without precision is just expensive optimism. Think about retry amplification. One failed event in a fan-out architecture can trigger 1,000 Lambda invocations in seconds. That's not a feature, that's a bill. Cloud bills are just architectural feedback reports. If you ignore the feedback loop between economics and engineering, the system will eventually optimize for the vendor's profit, not your stability. Sometimes synchronous calls are more stable. That is not regression, that is system awareness. Multi-account strategy is another sacred cow. Isolation is good, blast radius matters, but I've walked into organizations with more AWS accounts than developers. Every feature gets an account. Every environment gets 3 more. Suddenly IAM is a maze. Networking is duplicated. Accounts are governance containers. They exist to isolate risk, not to represent creativity. Before creating a new account, ask, what risk am I isolating? Isolation without intent is just entropy. IAM, left alone, optimizes for convenience, and permissions do not shrink. They sediment. And then there's the well-architected framework. It's valuable, but only if you use it correctly. It was designed to provoke questions, not mandate implementations. Yet I see teams treat pillars like commandments. Reliability, add redundancy everywhere. Security, explode IAM boundaries. Suddenly, you have multi-region active-active infrastructure serving traffic that could comfortably run in one region. That's not resilience. That's architectural theater. Trajectory design. Every enhancement adds moving parts, and moving parts fail. Architecture is not about maximizing pillar scores. It's about selecting trade-offs consciously. AWS guidance assumes scale, complexity, and distributed teams. Your reality may not match that assumption. If you design for imagined scale, You inherit imagined complexity. Time is the real runtime environment, and most architects never test in it. Complex systems rarely explode dramatically. They decay quietly through friction, confusion, and fatigue. That's the real cost of following best practices without judgment. The real best practice? Thinking. Not reacting, not copying, not assembling patterns because they look modern. Thinking. Ask, what problem am I solving? What constraint am I responding to? What complexity am I introducing? What does this decision cost in cognition? You can build a terrible system using every recommended AWS service, and you can build an elegant one with very few. The difference is not the pattern, it's the architect. This is systems thinking for architects. Remember this, architecture is judgment, not obedience. Thinking is the only tier that scales. See you in the next one.